I believe that this is not going to be a fad. There is only going to be a greater acceleration towards things like group therapy, psychedelics. There's things that I might be seen as fringe now. I mean, if we think about how we were talking about sauna cold plunges, there's going to be a greater interest for people to take care of themselves because just the way the world is set up, it's not set up in your favor to necessarily make you feeling good every day.
This is All Things Fitness and Wellness, hosted by Chrissy Van. Together, we're uniting industry thought leaders and fitfluencers on the mission to inspire innovation and encourage people to live a life fit and well. On this episode of All Things Fitness and Wellness, I'm joined by Brian Von Ancken, the visionary founder of ANCKOR and the founder of now publicly launched Wellness Growth Mastermind. Initially pursuing a career in law, Brian's journey into the wellness industry was fueled by personal hardships, including miscarriage and divorce, which led him to discover the true meaning of holistic health beyond just physical fitness. As a former early hire at Tough Mudder and the previous head of partnerships at Othership, Brian combines his diverse background with his passion for emotional and social well-being. In this episode, we'll explore the lessons he's learned from startup life, his advocacy efforts for the fitness and wellness industry, and the motivations behind his new mastermind group. Join us for an inspiring conversation on how to integrate mental, emotional, and social elements into fitness and entrepreneurship. Before we get to it, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new episodes every Wednesday featuring industry thought leaders and influencers. Plus, each week, we drop a new edition of This Week in Fitness, where we crunch the latest fitness headlines, all in under 5 minutes. I'm your host, Chrissy Van, and this is ATFW. Brian, I had the opportunity to meet you this past May, and we were on site in DC for the advocacy efforts that were taking place with the Health and Fitness Association, formerly IRSA, really with the ultimate goal to get more people moving, discuss the FIT Act, which is, of course, the Personal Health Investment Today Act, which I know the fitness industry has been striving towards. But you and I had the chance in the first day of meeting to have a really candid conversation, and I understood immediately that we see a lot of things the same way when it comes to wellness modalities, that integration into our fitness routines that are more of a holistic approach, taking that time to pause and breathe, and really noting personally how much of an impact that can have. So, Brian, I know for yourself, you started out in law. Tell me a little bit about how all of a sudden you built this bridge in toward the fitness and wellness space.
Yes. Well, it is like everybody's path. It's not necessarily straight, but I'm so excited to be chatting with you. Yeah, because we resonated, we connected right away. And really the story for me is beyond law. I like to think of it as the should life. So for like a really long time, I kind of did what was expected of me. Like I went to the good school, I played college football, I got good grades, I ended up going to law school, and I just was kind of like following this trajectory that was maybe expected of me to some degree. And I'm somebody who I wasn't unhappy. I definitely loved what I was doing, but I knew initially that I wanted to get involved in physical health. I really, really loved physical health and wellness and playing college football and just always being somebody who's active. As I was graduating law school, I had this fork in the road. So I basically had an offer to go work at a real estate law firm, which would have been lovely. But in my third year of law school, I interned for this weird little company called Tough Mudder, which at the time was just 10 people in a room. We had put on one event, and I was interning their legal intern, which they needed because they literally were putting people, for those of you who don't know, it's a 13-mile obstacle course event with, you know, barbed wire, going up and down walls, electrical shocks at the end. So they were doing a lot of crazy stuff to people, and people really, they needed a waiver. They needed to make sure they were on, had their legal dialed up. And like a startup, I just wore a lot of different hats, and I just fell in love with building startups and also just being involved in something that was physical, but also not just about competition, because I love competition, but this was about camaraderie. It was about teamwork, about community, about bringing people together. And so those things really resonated with me. So they drew me in, and then I was at Tough Mudder, and then it was kind of off to the races from there.
I really relate to what you're saying when I actually always call it the life script TM, where we just have this little checkbox and you think, oh, if I do this, this is the recipe for a happy life. And I mean, we could dive down a whole rabbit hole where I would say happiness isn't the goal, it's a state of being. You
Hmm.
weave in and out of it. But it is so funny how so many of us do kind of follow that path. And then all of a sudden you realize it's not that what you're doing, as you say, it wasn't bad. Law
No.
is a great career. There's so many avenues that you could go, but you were realizing perhaps that that wasn't necessarily in alignment. So from Tough Mudder, then what starts to tickle your fancy?
Yeah. So the journey at that point takes a turn, and basically, life threw me a curveball. So I was on that should like, even though Tough Mudder was a bit of a zag, I still was on the path. I was in house. I was working in the legal role, but life threw me a curveball in the form of miscarriages and divorce. I really married my college sweetheart, kind of went down that path, and then just kind of had my brain broken by that experience. And after having that happen, I realized that I had buddies of mine who I would take a bullet for. They'd take a bullet for me, but I didn't really know how to tell them that I wasn't okay. And so
Right.
I really invested in myself. I took a year off. I traveled. I did some consulting, and I really invested in the other modalities of health beyond just physical health. So I went to a silent retreat. I did yoga retreats. I did men's work. I did all sorts of different, breath work, all sorts of different modalities because I was really interested in understanding and strengthening those other muscles of health, which I call total health. And it was a really fascinating experience because when I came out of that, I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to build my own company. I know what I want to do now. I really want to build a workout that involves some of these other modalities of health, but in a really accessible way. Because everything I went to, this was like 6 or 7 years ago, was so woo woo and it was so inaccessible and it just would turn off the people who needed it the most. And to
Yeah.
me, I wanted physical health to still be the pillar. Like, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but something that I
I
see
love
happening
tangents, by the way, so
something that
please.
I see happening these days is that, people forget that physical health, they almost forget about physical health. They're like, okay, I'll just meditate, I'll do the cold plunge, I'll breath work, and it's like, no, you gotta move your body. You gotta find that way to make sure that you're getting the sweat, that you're, challenging yourself, you're getting stronger. And so it was really important for me to have that be a pillar that is important. So I created a workout that involved breath work, meditation, and kind of group sharing called ANCKOR. And I did that for a couple of years. Two of which were during COVID, which was a whole other thing.
So I just want to go back a little bit
Sure.
because, you talk about the almost feeling like the brain broken moment. And I can't emphasize enough anyone that has ever had we spend so much of our life worrying, but it's really those things that we don't expect to slam into us that knock the wind out of us completely. And it can
Hmm.
be really difficult if you don't have foundations like that already in place. And I hear you when you say, my circle of friends, of course, they're incredible. They have my back. But especially from a male perspective, it's changing. But I would say pretty confidently it can be more challenging to be that level of vulnerable of I'm not okay. And to be honest, I think as well, as we grew up, there was a lot of don't express your feelings, shove them down. So a lot of us are very out of tune with what that even looks like. You say that you went on this journey of the silent retreat and embracing all these different modalities, but I'm curious, how long was it from when you were like, winded, life knocked out of me, don't know what the direction to go in is, to embracing those modalities? And how was that the direction you went? Was this something you were curious about before, or what was the catalyst?
I'm the type of person that I feel like I make lemonade out of lemons, or I'm gonna use these things that can happen to me. I'm going to try to do my best to turn them into positives or turn them into experiences that I can learn from. And I had done a couple of yoga classes. I had meditated maybe 10 minutes my whole life, but I took a real flyer and I just went and did a week long silent retreat. And I'd never meditated more than 10 minutes. And that was just I mean, it's kind of like going and doing a marathon without ever running more than a mile. I wouldn't recommend it. It was crazy. There was just a lot that I had to kind of learn very quickly. But I think that what it just came down to was there was just a curiosity that was picked by doing that experience that led to more. Listen, I'm not going to claim like, oh, and I got total awareness from like one experience. No, it was, I mean, it took like a couple of years to really get me to a place where I was like, okay, I kind of feel like I get this. I kind of feel like I feel comfortable having conversations, understanding myself. And I actually think one of the most impactful experiences for me was understanding that we're all physical creatures, right? That's why working out is so important. It's like movement, understanding our bodies. We can ignore so much that's going on in our bodies because we're so up here all the time. We're so heady, and the reality is we're kind of all dumb animals. And so if you feel a feeling, if you're like, oh man, I really feel kind of upset about this thing, it's easy for us to be like, oh, well, don't feel that because there's so many people in the world who are worse off, or, you're better off than so many people in the world, or don't feel that because you're not tough. And it's like our bodies are just dumb animals. And I think of like emotions like sneezes or something, just something that they need to be like, oh, okay, I didn't realize I had to feel fear right now, or I had to feel scared or sadness or whatever, and just like getting permission for your body to be like, okay, I'm going to feel that. I'm going to move on and we'll see what comes next.
I really appreciate that. And so you're doing this deep inner work. And then on top of that, you have this incredible startup experience with Tough Mudder. You've now gone through a big shift in your life. On the other side, your entrepreneurial appetite now is in full swing, bringing ANCKOR to life. And I understand all of a sudden you end up at the forefront of another company that's still in a huge growth phase, Othership. So is that when it came into play post COVID?
Yeah, so I think it's important to call out. I think it's easy for me to say, and I built this startup and we had thousands of people do it and just only have the positive spin. But I think it's a really important genesis of what I'm doing right now, which is to explain that the startup journey and the founder journey is just really hard in the health and wellness space. Growing a business in wellness, in fitness is hard. And it's something that you really need a full skill set in order to accomplish it well. And you need to take care of yourself. I was becoming a hypocrite by the end where I was teaching 7 classes, I was doing all the business stuff, and then I just wasn't taking care of myself. And I ended up blowing out my bicep. There was just so much that happened. My body was like, stop, stop, stop. And I was able to finally get to that point. But what I realized is that I did not know anything about growth and marketing. I just didn't. It wasn't my background. I was a lawyer, I did operations, I had a great product. But at that point, when I decided to end ANCKOR, I was super determined to lean into my weakness as opposed to my strength. And so I'm going to become an expert in growth and marketing in the health and wellness space. And that's what I set out to do. And that's what ultimately led me to help lead growth and partnerships at Othership, which is a beautiful sauna cold plunge experience for anybody who's never checked it out. It's in Toronto and New York. I launched their first spaces. I helped them launch their breathwork app. Eventually went on to be at Barry's for over a year. And basically throughout that time, though, I have been organically connecting with people who are really big rock stars in the space when it comes to growing their companies or growing whatever it might be in the health and wellness space. And I was just bringing them together. So organically, I would bring together, oh, I met the head of growth at HVMN, and oh, the founder of LMNT. We're talking about, let's bring us all together. Oh, okay. And we would get together once a month. I called it the Wellness Growth Mastermind. And we started off as just a couple people. And fast forward a couple years, it's really grown a lot, which is great.
Well, not just grown a lot, because let's have it right here on the day that this episode is out. So today, obviously, if you're listening, that's got an asterisk on it, but some very big news on your end.
Yes. So, I mean, I so appreciate you letting me come on and talk about this today. But basically, over the last 2 years, as I said, I've just realized that growing the health and wellness business is hard. And the most important thing you can have is a really generous, connected community that has your back. And I think a lot of us have a lot of LinkedIn followers, which is pretty nice, or maybe we're a member of some organization. But if you're part of a group where people actually have been there, done that, they have a generous, open mind, like, you know, the health and wellness space is an all boats rise industry. Like if somebody starts working out more, they're more likely to take care of their mental health and vice versa. And so we're able to support each other, the partnerships that can happen. And so, anyway, today we're announcing the formal public launch of the Wellness Growth Mastermind, which is something I've been building for the last couple of years. It's a very exclusive group of 150 leaders in the health and wellness space, from brands like 8 Sleep, Levels Health, HVMN, LMNT, all the way down to startups building AI journaling apps or yoga studio chain. We've got all different. Wellness is a very broad term for us right now, but the big key is people who are good people, who are generous, who are see the benefit of connections. And so we're finally opening applications to the public. So I'm announcing it publicly. We've got a site, and would love to connect with people who are building in the space and to provide them with support, to give them resources, to connect them with the right people. It's like one connection can just change the trajectory of your business. And I really pride ourselves on doing that. We make one new connection per month for every member, which is really nice. So yeah, that's it. We're excited. It'll be fun.
Well, we kind of started the conversation talking about the power of curiosity. So if people are curious to learn more, what is the site that you've launched?
Yeah, it's joinwgm.com. So joinwgm.com, or you can check out my LinkedIn. I'll be posting about it today. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that those are in all the show notes of this conversation as well. But one of the things that you speak to is the fact that it is a generous community in regards to that sharing of information, idea sharing, telling stories of what worked, and really where we get the most value are the things that absolutely did not work. So let's dive into a few of those because you do have a lot of startup experience. So, what have been some of the biggest challenges or obstacles that you have faced that you feel could be common ones that other people, if they have a heads up, could mitigate?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's so many. So it kind of depends what stage you're at, right? So when I was at Tough Mudder, one of the biggest things that we had a challenge with is we had these diehard fans. We had people who just loved us. They literally would tattoo Tough Mudder on them. And we had this decision of whether, okay, do we continue to be as, badass and like out there to appease our biggest fans, or do we go more mainstream? And I think we ended up going a little bit more mainstream, and I think we ended up spinning out a couple different brands within Tough Mudder that I think I like to use the analogy of a snake that dies of indigestion. If a snake eats too much, it will die of indigestion. And so, when you're in that middle stage where you already have the brand, you already have your company, you've got your diehards, reinvesting in them and making sure you just have those experiences. I like to talk about it as like, what is the thing that your person that one of your clients, your customers is going to tell somebody on a date, or they're going to tell their significant other, they're going to use and be like, yeah, no, I did this thing. And then there's electroshock, or, I went to the gym and I know they have this sauna cold plunge. They have cold plunge that's 30 degrees or whatever it might be. So it's like finding those little, tidbits that people can use as those springboards to kind of create more customers. So that's kind of that mid-sized issue, I'd say. So the other thing, especially if you're early days, is if you're like creating an app or you're creating some sort of content or something like that, especially if you're trying to put a paywall behind it, it can just get really difficult really quickly because there's so much content out there. So much of it is free. The expectation is free. And so just making sure that you're very intentional and you can have the long time horizon. Like, for me, I've been building this business for 2 years on the side now, and that has allowed me to build the credibility, to build the trust of my own people. And I saw that with the breathwork app that I built as well, that we like really had to kind of seed it for quite a while in order to create that buzz, that community that was able to then get into it. Because the reality is you can go out there, you can go on Facebook, you can put down $1, you can try to get $1.25 back, but that's becoming harder and harder these days. And the leads that you get from paid are just not the same as the ones that you can get organically, the ones you can get from referrals. And so like making sure you know the ways to hack that so that your customer experience is just top notch and that your referral programs are easy to use. And it's blocking and tackling, but it can be so overwhelming, especially if you're early stage. You're like, okay, do I do TikTok, or I got to make sure that I like have my SEO lined up, and like it's just who's an expert in everything. It's impossible to be an expert in everything, and it's really really nice to just have people who have your back, who you kind of like. No offense to agencies or stuff like that, but it's harder to trust the word of somebody who you're paying. They're really useful, but it's also nice to have a sanity check where like you can't Google this sort of stuff, and you want to be able to have other people that have your back, and that's kind of what I'm hoping the group can be for businesses.
Well, and especially with who you're targeting within that group, because at the end of the day, that trust is everything. And to
Hmm.
your point, number one of the things that you highlight is you can't really be incredible at all the platforms. And I do think it is important to choose what you're going to niche into. Where do my people that I actually want to speak to hang out the most? Is an
Hmm.
excellent question to ask yourself. And then leaning into those spaces, and it also can be really difficult, especially for yourself, that was like, I was doing all this growth and marketing work because I realized it wasn't my skill set and it's something that I'd like to acquire. But the ball in those spaces is constantly moving. And I know that that's something for business no matter what. I mean, especially in the age of generative AI and everything we're seeing come up in the tech space, it's constantly evolving, but especially in those social spaces where we are looking to generate the word and generate those communities and generate trust because it's so pay to play, it becomes very muddied in regards to exactly what the algorithm wants to be fed at any given time. And let's face it, they do that on purpose. But thirdly, to your point on that, like spend a dollar, get a dollar 25 back, it can end up where you have this inauthentic following to a degree. They don't have that personal connection to you. And that is such an important tool to have. So, when it comes to the marketing lessons that you learned along the way, as someone that said, it wasn't my forte, and I basically had to ground up, what were the most valuable takeaways for you that you garnered when you were re educating and re upping your skill set?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like I've worked in a lot of different roles. I've worn a lot of hats. I mean, I think it's been really interesting to see UGC and the way that UGC can just become a really big growth accelerant for a company if you're doing it the right way and you're utilizing it the right way and you're finding the right people. I mean, we've got a company we work with that helps scan your customer base to see what their social followings are, so you can get kind of these nano influencers to help start to become ambassadors for you. And I think also just working with higher end influencers and podcasts. I've got when I was working with Othership, I helped get Robbie, the founder, on probably 50 or so podcasts in 6 or 9 months. And so I think the podcasting world is a really really underutilized. Or, could be a really great tool, and it kind of just depends where you're willing to spend your dollars. And I think, like you said, you got to know where your people hang out. But I don't know. There's the B2B aspect of it as well, which is like that's a whole new game, given that there's some big, players out there now, like Gympass, now WellHub, I believe, that, just kind of make, if you're trying to, go that route, okay, well, maybe do you start your own podcast or do you put on events at your space? I've seen some really great, there's someone in our group who works for FFC in Chicago, and she puts on amazing events that attracts HR leaders. And she's been able to turn that into some great corporate business. And it's like, just getting creative and using inspiration from different people. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to answer that question because there's so many different ways to go, and that's kind of the point of the group, I guess, is to try to help people manage that overwhelm that could come from all that.
Yeah, without question. Now, you talked about the fact that you were building this group kind of silently over the last couple of years and now creating that public invitation. But we started the conversation speaking to the fact that we did meet in DC and amplifying the voice of the fitness industry on Capitol Hill with the ultimate goal, when you really drill it down, to just get more people moving and making it more accessible to more of the population without, so there's less of a financial barrier. But one of the other things that's so greatly discussed when everyone gets together from the fitness industry is this change of narrative. I've spoken a lot of times. I'm a child of late 80s, 90s. So, a woman that grew up in the era of diet culture. Similarly, for people of this age group, all the shredded abs were all the advertisements. And that's really, when you looked at a gym, what you would think about, that it was the space to do all of that, get smaller or bulk up the muscles. And luckily, we've seen huge shifts in marketing in the space because, I mean, we talk about that 80% they're trying to target all the time, and you can understand they weren't being spoken to for a lot of the time. It seemed very intimidating in regards to the
Mm.
space, but you have such a hand and a pulse on what's happening on that wellness side, and we're really seeing this bridge now get built. Many gyms have offerings for recovery. They are changing within classes. I mean, my regular yoga class now on certain days of the week incorporate a sound bath, and to your point, as you said earlier, things that were once deemed woo woo are now what the consumers are asking for. So, in this hive mind that you've created, what are kind of the up and coming modalities or the biggest things that are causing a buzz in that wellness space that consumers are starting to demand?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big question, right? I mean, I think it's interesting how quickly things have changed, right? I remember when I was advocating breath work and cold plunging 4 to 5 years ago, even I was getting scoffed at. It was kind of like, oh man, who's this guy? And how ubiquitous it's become, how almost like overplayed some of it has become. Maybe it's just in my own circles, but it's very interesting how quickly things can change. And I really think it makes sense, especially for these brick and mortar facilities. You know, it's a big investment to try to put in a sauna, cold plunge, whatever it might be, and you want to make sure that it's not, you're not being fickle. There's not like a trend aspect of it. But I do think that what I've just noticed on a broader scale, and this might be known, is the spaces that people have to go to experience community and um, kind of a sense of belonging has just diminished over time, over the last 50 years or so. And gyms have become that de facto place. And they've always been able to get away with just the workouts being that place, but there is a real desire for that communityness to be brought to the next level. And so you mentioned, obviously there's the, Pilates, there's yoga, there's all these other modalities that you can incorporate to try to make sure that you address different needs of the consumer. But I think that at the end of the day, intentional space curation and programming are what you want, right? So it doesn't have to be the sauna and the cold plunge and like, oh, all of a sudden, if you have that, we'll create a mecca for people, right? It's like, no, you have to just kind of touch people immediately. I mean, it's customer service 101, but if you just once people are there, they feel part of it, they understand the vibe, they're interested in staying in the spaces. I mean, if you go to Othership in New York, they just built this new facility. It is like it's the most inviting space you've ever seen. It's kind of stadium seating. It's got like this big middle space with a fire, and it's just like it just
I've
feels like a
seen
space that you
visuals. I
want.
wanna try
Yeah,
it so badly. I go to Toronto quite a bit, so I'm like, although I get different, but everything I've
same
seen, I'm
thing.
like, "Yep, I could live in there for a while."
Exactly. I mean, and I think the other thing that I'll say, that at least to give a concrete answer, is longevity is the new buzzword, right? So people want to live longer. People want, health span, not lifespan. And so, what are the ways in which you can incorporate longevity? You can incorporate testing. They're able to use that as a barometer. I mean, it's not that different than people are always going to be interested in what are the things that I can measure that I can improve, right? And it's easy in the weight room to do that. But if you can find other aspects that people can buy into and have a path, I mean, that's what I would recommend to look into. And obviously, recovery too is always good.
There's lots of turmoil in the world around this. There always is, but the thing is we've got these in our hands all the time. So how often do we put them down not feeling exposed to all of that? And I get, for those that are listening, I held up my phone, which you probably clued in, being like, what's the thing that so many people, it's the first thing they open up at the beginning of the day. It's the last thing they close at the end of the day, which is a terrible habit. If that is something that you've adopted, don't check the emails the minute you get out of bed in the morning. There's so much science to back up why that's not the move. But I think it's just been really funny to see that or not funny, but just really exciting to see that consumer behavior change on the other side, because no longer are these things woo woo. There's so much technology as well weaving into the wellness space. To your point, how we have these tools for people to have this really holistic understanding of what is happening in the body and really connecting that brain to body connection. Is there a specific demographic that you see, though, that's biting into and accelerating this movement, so to speak, the most?
It's tough to say because there's a part of me that wants to say Gen Z, right? I think Gen Z are the ones who have higher expectations when it comes to health, and they want it to be more holistic. But I mean, I just do think that the accelerants will be the Gen Xers and the boomers who are really at that point where it's like, okay, I want to be super intentional about my health, and I'm going to be investing in it, and the longevity stuff is really, really top of mind for me. And by the way, I want to have a pickleball space and whatever. So, and might have some more free time on my hands. And so I've always felt like that's an underserved market to some degree. And to me, it's a market that is more sophisticated technologically than we might think, and more interested in the non-traditional than we might think as well. Obviously not for everybody, but that's I've been seeing a lot of companies that are starting to try to address that market.
Yeah, it is so easy to make Gen Z the focus because they get it out of the gate. But I
Yeah,
think if things are marketed correctly, there's not a want from those generations to lean into these types of spaces if they've given it a try.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, the millennials obviously, like, we're the ones who I think are going to be the majority, especially for places like Othership and some of these sauna, cold plunge type stuff. But I just really, what it comes down to for me is I believe that this is not going to be a fad. There is only going to be a greater acceleration towards things like group therapy, psychedelics. There's things that I might be seen as fringe now. I mean, if we think about how we were talking about sauna cold plunges, there's going to be a greater interest for people to take care of themselves, because just the way the world is set up, it's not set up in your favor to necessarily make you feeling good every day. If you're looking at screens, if you're not eating well, whatever it might be. And so eventually there's just going to be more and more demand for ways to help people feel better, and it's just always easier if it's all done together. If there's one way to kind of, the more easy you make it for people, the more likely they are to do it, obviously.
Yeah, and when we look at how, because really what it drills down to is a lot of people looking to find ways to keep their mental health healthy. And traditionally, if to your point that you said earlier, in a group setting amongst your guys, wouldn't A, be the place that you would say anything about it? So the stigma was so very real. B, if you actually did find that you were greatly struggling and let's say did seek out help, if it's through a medical professional, first course of action is generally going to be medication. And we are
Mhm.
seeing the shifts happen in that space, and it's because the science is catching up. I actually just interviewed a gentleman, Dr. Michael Hoskins, and he was speaking to some of the scientific studies. And I've had Dr. Ben Singh on from New South Wales, who was the hugely public study. I believe it was last March that it came out that basically had said that exercise was better than medications as the first course of action for depression and anxiety. But when it was Dr. Hoskins, he said it takes about 17 years from when these studies first generate till mainstream is like, "Oh, aha, okay, I got it." And so we are in this really fascinating space, to your point, where the shift is happening in real time, that people are understanding that these modalities can have such a greater difference. And it really is exciting to see this bridge in the fitness industry as well, because circling back to time on Capitol Hill, one of the big things that was emphasized in the rooms with senators or members of Congress was that physical activity is imperative for our mental and our social health as well, and really getting them to understand that all those pillars go together. So, for yourself, that was the first time, as I understand, that you had participated in a fly in. Why was this important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to be stuck in our little bubbles, right? It's just like there's a million things to do, and we can check the news and we can keep an eye on all the things that are, worrying us, and the terrible things that seem to be going on. But um, I just really believe in the root of so much that is going wrong in this world is if people could figure out how to be a little bit healthier, a little bit happier, a little kinder. That's the sort of stuff that has that root effect to then affect almost every other news story that you might see. And so, yeah, I just believe in the concept of advocacy, and to me, especially after what happened in COVID, as a gym who was affected, and to see that there wasn't really the infrastructure in place to help, to have the government, have our backs, so to speak. I wanted to make sure that I, contributed to that. And just, to me, it's a everybody has a personal fitness story on the hill, or everybody, and if you can try to remind people of that and be able to then link it to the issues like you said around mental health, like schools, there's just so many big issues that we need to tackle. And if I'm being honest, we need to attack them via unconventional ways. If we just go the conventional ways, I think we're going to get a lot of the same results. And I think emphasizing fitness, mental wellness, integrating it into our systems in a more intentional way, and not having it be, I mean, isn't it so awful that it is just like discretionary income, and it's like a nice to have and not a need to have? Like, what if taking care of yourself was looked at societally the same as brushing your teeth? If you said to someone like, "Oh, I don't brush my teeth," they'd be like, "What?" I mean, you could do whatever you want to do, but really? You sure? Like, and if what if the same thing was around, do you work out? Do you spend a little bit of time like reflecting or taking care of your mental health? Like, if I just want to start moving that forward, I think it does take some advocacy work to start that process to get there.
Well, and it takes so many different perspectives and lenses, and also that repeat to the hill as well, because obviously things are highly changeable in those spaces. And the fitness and wellness industry as a whole is up against some really large groups that have been at it for a long time, that also don't necessarily have the same intentions. Like, I've said it before, but when you look at pharmaceuticals at the end of the day, a lot of their business is with sick people, and that makes a lot of money. And so I think the louder that we get, the better, because what we stand for, especially when it comes to the side where we're advocating not just for adults to be able to use it to write off portions of gym memberships, but sports equipment and youth sports. And we know that the physical inactivity crisis is not something that is solely impacting the adults. It is sadly something that children aren't getting the time in recess. Their physical activity time in the school system just gets shorter and shorter. And we're humans, as you said, like this animal avatar that we live in, we're built to move. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, we're just getting less and less of that. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. If more people were doing the things, I don't think that we would have such a mentally and physically unhealthy population as we do. And on that note, because your entire announcement today is about gathering people together and inviting them into the fold, and about this idea sharing and the Wellness Growth Mastermind really just heading into this new evolution. So, first of all, big congratulations to you. But as we round up the conversation, I'm curious to know, as someone that has gone from law to entering into a startup to becoming an entrepreneur to then doing more startups and becoming marketing growth guru, what have been the most valuable lessons that you have garnered from mentors along the way? Because to your point, and really what it represents that you're creating, none of us really get there alone.
Yeah. No, it's so true, and the value of having people in your corner, um, I've never applied for a single job. So any kind of role I've gotten has just been via the community that I've built, people understanding they have my back. I also just I feel like I've learned a lot around, people ask me all the time, they're like, "How do I get a job in the health and wellness space? It's such a cool space. Like I'm working at Facebook and whatever, and it's cool, but I don't care about it." And you know, there's lots of ways to find jobs listings, but in my opinion, on LinkedIn, it's there's a posting and then there's like 1,000 applicants right away. And what I've just learned is that, especially when you live that startup life, you're like, okay, how do I add value? How do I make myself valuable to somebody for almost no money and demonstrate that value? And then how do I then find myself in a place where I'm able to ask and be taken care of and maybe start part time? So it's like, you find the company that, you're like, okay, these are three companies that I'd love to work for. How do I identify what these people are working on? How do I analyze something that they've done publicly and give them feedback? Or how do I say, hey, I don't know if you're open to 10 hours a week of this, that, and that, just kind of making yourself really valuable first, not feeling entitled and being able to just provide value first. And at the Wellness Growth Mastermind, that's kind of what I'm doing, where if people apply and they're accepted, or I believe that they'd be a good value add to the group. I have them come out to a session first, and I just provide so much value to them where it's just like, okay, you're going to get inundated with connections. You're going to get inundated with solutions to help solve where you're at right now. And you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay, I can't wait to join. And that's the vibe that I want. That's the energy that I want. And those people then can't wait to give back. And so I think those are, kind of that give first mentality is something that's been really big for me. And also I think at the end of the day, it's trusting my instincts, right? Like my instincts are to be kind. My instincts are to be accommodating. My instincts are to be warm. My instincts are to just like be like kooky. And I think that the more that I lean into my instincts, the better things end up working out for me.
I love that. And especially, I just appreciate a journey. It's kind of why even before we started this conversation and you were like, "What areas do you wanna focus?" And I always like to dig into people's personal why, especially in this industry. I'm curious about people and why they do what they do or choose what they choose because we're all different in our own ways, but also because it's blown me away how almost every single executive person that I have interviewed in this space truly has such a rooted foundation to why they do what they do. And kind of to your point, what you're saying there about people working for companies that they're like, yeah, it's cool, but it doesn't really like resonate, or I don't necessarily believe in the core of what they do. It's so refreshing to see people come into a space and say, we actually are creating very real change in our societies and very real positive change in our societies. And the space that you're operating in particular is so exciting right now because it's existed in all these different forms, but we have all this innovation happening and also so much more buy-in from society that are understanding just the wealth of difference it can make in their lives. So I wish you so much success with this new venture. I know that we had it in the middle of the podcast there, but because today is the big day, just remind people where they can find you and how can they get involved.
Yeah, so you can find us at joinwgm.com. That's for the Wellness Growth Mastermind. You can also find me on my LinkedIn, Brian Von Ancken. And I just want to end on what you said around inspiration because I think that's one of the biggest things that I end up bringing is that when you are around people who care about wellness, have their personal story, are building really inspiring, cool things, you get inspired. And I think the fitness industry is really good at that. And there are a lot of organizations and ways for people to get together. But I think that when you start incorporating wearables and you start incorporating mental wellness apps and all these other aspects, really cool things start happening. That's when alchemy starts happening, partnerships start happening. It's just a really inspiring space to be around, like you said. So, yeah, join WGM.com. Applications are open. We'd love to connect. And, I just want to say to you, thank you so much. This has been really, really fun. I loved our connection before. I love the work that you're doing. You do such great work. And this has been a blast.
Brilliant, Brian. Well, I'm so glad we were able to make it happen. And I look forward to hopefully crossing paths in person soon.
Yeah, I'd love that. Come to New York anytime.
You've just listened to the All Things Fitness and Wellness podcast, hosted by Chrissy Van. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry insiders and influencers. Together, we're on a mission for everyone to live a life fit and well.